Long before wands were carved and spells had syllables, before Hogwarts stood upon its storm-crowned cliffs, the world itself shimmered with a power unnamed. The first wizards did not call it magic, they called it the breath of the earth, a living current that pulsed through stone, sky, water, and soul. It was an age when the boundary between the seen and unseen had not yet hardened. Rivers remembered every hand that cupped their waters. Forests whispered back to those who listened. The world was not enchanted. It was alive, and humanity, still young and uncertain, was learning to speak its language. The earliest wielders of that language were not born of bloodlines or destiny. They were listeners. They waited in silence until the world itself taught them its first truths, that a leaf does not fall alone. It will be a wonderful session for you if you could make an effort and write down your city name or share some love below in the comments. Let's continue. That thunder remembers where it has struck, and that the stars are the thoughts of the universe written in light. Their art was not taught in schools. It was earned in solitude. A child might wander into the mountains and return years later with eyes that saw the wind's shape. A woman might tend her hearth until the flame spoke her name. These were the first witches and wizards, custodians of balance rather than masters of power. But as with all gifts, the breath divided those who received it. Some used it to heal, to grow, to bind the world closer. Others sought to command it, to bend the living current to their will. In the clash between reverence and ambition, the first shadows of magical history were born. Across ancient valleys and forgotten coasts, gatherings began to form. The circles of stone in Britain, the temples of voice in Egypt, the cloudwalkers in the East, all practiced their own versions of the art. Yet even then, a strange pattern emerged. Wherever magic was studied, secrecy followed. Why? Because magic had memory, and it remembered betrayal. One story tells of Elian of the Western Isles, who taught kings how to weave storms into weapons. His reward was fear and then fire. The same kings who had begged for his power burned his tower to ash, declaring his craft unholy. When the smoke cleared, Elian's followers vanished into the mists, swearing never again to share their art with the ordinary world. From that vow of silence came the first hidden communities, the prototypes of the magical world we know today. They were not yet Hogwarts or Durmstrang, but scattered sanctuaries of knowledge. Forests where time slowed, caves where voices could shape stone, rivers that remembered faces. Over centuries, these sanctuaries formed the foundation of what would later become wizarding civilization. But with growth came danger, for secrecy is a fragile shield. The non-magical, those who could not feel the breath, began to sense that another world pulsed beside their own. Fires that never died, crops that grew overnight, whispers carried by owls at dusk. Too many signs for ignorance to hide. And so fear awoke. Fear, history teaches, has a perfect memory. By the dawn of the first millennium, the hidden societies faced a terrible choice: to vanish completely or to rule from the shadows. The decision would determine not just their fate, but the fate of the world itself. And somewhere in that turbulent dawn, a legend began to stir, of 4 mages who would seek to create a sanctuary unlike any other, a place where magic could live without fear and knowledge could survive without war. They would call it Hogwarts. But before that story could begin, the world would first need to learn what it meant to forget magic. For tomorrow's history of wizards is written not in what they created, but in what they chose to hide. There comes a moment in every civilization when wonder becomes fear. For the ancient world, that moment arrived quietly, like a spell cast in reverse. It began not with violence, but with silence. Temples that once echoed with chants of power grew still. The old words faded from memory, and the sacred stones were left to crumble beneath ivy and time. The Great Forgetting. That's what later wizards would call it, though in truth it was less a single event than a slow surrender. In those early centuries, magic had woven itself so deeply into the rhythms of life that its disappearance felt like the dimming of the sun. But humankind, restless and frightened, began to doubt the very forces that had once sustained it. The whispers of the earth were dismissed as superstition. The healers became heretics. The stars, once read for wisdom, were declared mere fire. The first wizards saw what was coming. They tried to warn the world. A council of 12 met in secret beneath the cliffs of Avalon, cloaked not for protection, but in grief. Among them were names lost to history: Iron the Star Reader, Marius of the Nine Flames, and a woman called Sarah of the Veil, whose voice could command truth itself. They debated for 7 nights by moonlight that refused to set. What should become of magic now that the world no longer wanted it? Some argued for dominance. "If they cannot see the truth," said Marius, "then let us rule in its name." Others, like Sarah, pleaded for mercy. "If we force our gift upon them," she whispered, "we will destroy what makes it sacred." In the end, their decision was both wise and tragic. They chose to withdraw. The council wove a spell so vast that it wrapped around the very consciousness of humankind, a gentle unbinding that blurred the memory of magic from the minds of ordinary people. Rivers still shimmered with power, but no one noticed. Ghosts still passed through the world, but were seen only in dreams. Thus began the long-shadowed age, when magic became myth. For centuries after, the wizarding world shrank into pockets of secrecy, forest enclaves, mountain sanctuaries, hidden valleys where the old craft survived in whispers and songs. The wizards called themselves the Rememberers. Their task was simple: keep the flame alive until the world was ready again. But secrecy has a cost. Isolation bred pride, and pride birthed division. Some families began to guard their knowledge as inheritance, their bloodlines as proof of worth. The first seeds of magical hierarchy were planted, the earliest echoes of what would later become the pure blood doctrine. And yet, amid the darkness of forgetting, there remained a few who believed in connection, that magic was meant not to divide, but to remind the world of its hidden unity. One of these visionaries was a young scholar named Brathen Will, who spent his life collecting fragments of lost spells and forgotten names. His journals, discovered centuries later, spoke of a prophecy: when the world has forgotten the stars, 4 shall rise to teach it how to dream again. Those words would echo through generations until they reached the ears of 4 extraordinary witches and wizards who would shape destiny itself. Their meeting would not happen for another 500 years, yet already the threads of their story were being woven. The world was dimming, but somewhere, faintly, the light endured. And so, as the Great Forgetting reached its quiet conclusion, a new age began. One of secrecy, resilience, and whispered hope. An age that would give birth to something greater than any single spell or family. A school, a refuge, a promise. The world had forgotten magic, but magic had not forgotten the world. It lingered in the curve of a wand-shaped branch, in the hush before thunder, in the dreams of children who could move pebbles without knowing why. From that quiet persistence came the 4 who would change everything. They did not meet by accident. Destiny, it seems, has a peculiar talent for arranging chance. The first was Godric Gryffindor, born of flame and honor in the windswept plains of the north. His people were warriors and wanderers, but his heart belonged not to battle, to justice. He carried a blade forged from meteorite iron, humming faintly with the same celestial pulse that ran through his veins. It was said that Godric could see courage in a man's eyes before the man himself knew it was there. The second was Helga Hufflepuff, a woman of warmth and wisdom from the fertile lowlands of the West. Where others sought power, she sought peace. Her magic flowed through the soil, calling crops to bloom in barren earth. They said her hearth fire never went out, not even when she was far from home. The third was Rowena Ravenclaw, the daughter of Starlight and Storm, whose mind could weave patterns that mirrored the constellations. From the misty cliffs of the north, she studied the language of the cosmos, crafting spells like architecture. Elegant, flawless, eternal, her eyes, deep as midnight glass, seemed to see both future and past. And the last was Salazar Slytherin, the serpent-souled prodigy of the Fens, whose mastery of the unseen was unmatched. Where others bent power to their will, he listened to it. He could hear the pulse of life beneath stone, the murmur of rivers beneath the skin of the world. He was brilliant, proud, and haunted by a fear he could never name. They met at a crossroads marked by no map, a meeting place of ley lines where magic still breathed freely, what is now known as the High Valley of Hogwarts. Each came seeking the same answer. Could the world ever remember magic without destroying it again? Their first council lasted 7 days and 7 nights. They spoke of the great forgetting, of the fading bloodlines, of children born with power but no guidance. They feared that without protection, the next generation of witches and wizards would be hunted, or worse, lost to their own untempered strength. And so, they made a covenant, a school, not of control, but of understanding, a sanctuary where the breath of the earth could be studied, shaped, and preserved, a place hidden from the world, yet meant to serve it. Thus, Hogwarts was born. But from the very beginning, cracks appeared in their unity. Godric believed that courage and honor should guide young witches and wizards, that bravery was the truest form of wisdom. Rowena valued intellect and mastery of craft, the mind as the bridge between mortal and divine. Helga saw equality, kindness, and hard work as the roots from which all greatness grew, and Salazar saw danger. He feared that opening the gates of Hogwarts to all would invite chaos, that those of non-magical birth would carry the seeds of ignorance that had once burned wizards at the stake. His vision of safety became obsession. His caution curdled into prejudice. Rowena challenged him. Godric confronted him. Helga wept for him. But Salazar's heart was already turning toward the shadows. He spoke of blood purity, of preserving magic through lineage. He began to build in secret, deep beneath the castle's foundations, a chamber known only to him. Yet before he departed, Salazar uttered a warning. You seek to teach magic to all, yet forget. Power without fear breeds ruin. When the world forgets again, remember this: a serpent always returns to its nest. Then he was gone, and the remaining 3 stood upon the tower they had built together, watching the fog roll in from the lake. Helga placed her hand upon the stone. "We will keep it safe," she said softly. Rowena's eyes glimmered. "And if it cannot be kept safe?" Godric's voice was steady. "Then let it be remembered." Thus began the first age of Hogwarts, a beacon rising from the ashes of the great forgetting. But even light casts a shadow, and deep beneath the castle walls, Salazar's legacy was already stirring, waiting for an heir who would one day wake what should have never slept. There are secrets beneath Hogwarts that even the portraits do not whisper of. Stone remembers everything: the footsteps of its builders, the weight of their dreams, the echoes of their quarrels. And deep below, where the castle's foundations merge with the living rock of Scotland, one memory endures above all others: the work of Salazar Slytherin. They say he vanished one storm-torn night, leaving behind no trace but a silence that unsettled even the ghosts. But that is not quite true. For beneath the sleeping chambers and echoing halls, his magic moved like a serpent through soil, unseen, unstoppable, shaping caverns with the slow patience of stone. The chamber was not built in a single night, nor even by a single hand. It was a living structure, grown through enchantments whispered into the very marrow of the earth. The walls pulsed faintly with life, veins of greenish light tracing through basalt. Slytherin's runes, fluid, reptilian, slithered across the surfaces like ink that refused to dry. He called it the Chamber of Secrets, though it was far more than a vault for hidden knowledge. It was a prophecy, a weapon, and a refuge. Slytherin believed that a day would come when Hogwarts' openness would destroy it, when wizards would forget caution and welcome those who neither understood nor respected magic's dangers. To him, the chamber was not treason, it was insurance, a guardian sealed away until the world needed cleansing. The creature that would sleep within it was the final testament of his genius, a serpent born not of flesh but of spellcraft older than language. The basilisk, he did not summon it from the wild. He created it, weaving its body from the essence of the earth's fear and giving it eyes that could kill with truth alone. Its purpose was not mere destruction but purification, at least in his mind. But magic shaped by fear never obeys its maker. When Salazar vanished, the others believed him gone forever. Yet Hogwarts itself seemed to grieve. Godric felt it first, the sudden stillness beneath the Great Hall, as if the foundations themselves were holding their breath. Helga's hearths burned lower, and Rowena, sleepless beneath her star-mapped ceiling, heard whispers in the walls, faint hissing that spoke in languages even she could not translate. Still, the school thrived. Students came from across the aisles, drawn by rumors of a place where magic lived openly once more. They studied under Rowena's brilliance, under Godric's valor, under Helga's compassion, and always, though none spoke of it, they felt the absence of the fourth founder like a shadow behind the light. But shadows, when ignored, do not vanish. They grow. It began with strange happenings, water rippling in still basins, portraits blinking with unease, small animals vanishing from the corridors. A student swore she heard a voice through the stones, whispering her name in a language like silk and venom. When Rowena investigated, she found nothing, only a hollow coldness beneath her feet. In her private notes, preserved centuries later by her descendants, she wrote, "There is something beneath us that thinks, and it remembers him." By the time of Rowena's death, the chamber was already legend, a rumor told to frighten first years, dismissed by the professors as fancy. Yet it remained, patient as only stone can be. The basilisk slept, dreaming of the voice that had sung it into existence, and above, generations of wizards came and went, building new stories upon the old bones of forgotten ones. But every few decades, when the castle's stones groaned beneath the weight of change, when war or sorrow stirred the air, a faint vibration would echo through the dungeons, like the heartbeat of something vast and ancient. Helga's descendants said it was the castle settling. Godric's believed it was the mountain speaking, but those who bore the serpent's crest knew better. They said quietly and without pride, "He is not gone. He is waiting." And so Hogwarts grew, not just as a school, but as a living testament to its founder's contradiction. A sanctuary built on love and fear, a monument raised to both wisdom and warning, a place where the brightest magic of humanity was shadowed by the deepest of its doubts. For even as students laughed in candlelit halls, deep beneath them lay a truth older than any spellbook. Every light that burns brightly casts the darkest shadow where it cannot reach. There comes a time in every age when history grows weary of remembering itself. The echoes fade, the stories soften, and the warnings that once rang like thunder become gentle murmurs. lullabies for the unguarded. So it was with Hogwarts. The centuries that followed the founders' passing were quiet ones, at least on the surface. Yet beneath that stillness, the magic of the world was shifting. It began with forgetfulness. Wizards stopped tracing their power back to the wild forests and star-touched stones. They began instead to draw it from themselves. Confident, proud, certain they had tamed what once terrified their ancestors. The Ministry of Magic, in its earliest fragile form, promised order and civility. The world was, at last, civilized, or so they claimed. But the price of order is always silence. The founders' names still adorned the house banners, but their meaning dulled with time. Gryffindor became courage without consequence. Hufflepuff, kindness without conviction. Ravenclaw, wit without wisdom. And Slytherin, Slytherin became ambition without remembrance. The serpent's mark faded from the common tongue, but its spirit coiled quietly in bloodlines and basements, whispering still of purity and legacy. Students came and went, unaware that every step they took pressed down on a sleeping giant beneath their feet. In the shadow of this peace rose a new breed of wizard, the chroniclers. They were scholars, historians, the keepers of parchment and ink. They believed knowledge alone could shield the world from chaos. But history, as it often does, began to choose what it wished to remember. Records of the founders' disputes grew vague, their edges softened by retelling. Slytherin's departure was rewritten as noble exile, his beliefs misunderstood. The chamber became a myth, dismissed as superstition from darker times, and thus the castle began to forget itself. The portraits, once alert and opinionated, fell into long stretches of sleep. The ghosts who had seen centuries rise and fall stopped speaking of the deep places. Even the staircases grew restless, shifting less out of mischief and more out of loneliness. There were still whispers, of course. The caretaker's cat sometimes hissed at shadows that moved without light. A young student, too curious for her own good, once claimed to hear a heartbeat echoing in the pipes. But such stories were laughed off, confined to bedtime chatter and Halloween dares. Then came the age of the archives, a century where wizards built libraries like temples, hoarding tomes that told them only what they wished to know. Magic became academic, predictable, safe. Yet for every truth that was written, a dozen were buried, not by malice, by convenience. The ministry began sealing records that contradicted its clean narrative of progress. A war here, a massacre there, the loss of a village erased by a single obliviate decree. Whole families disappeared into rumor, their names struck from genealogies. And in that great silencing, the chamber's memory found its echo. The castle itself, living, breathing, ancient, began to resist the quiet. Doors opened where none should exist. Candles refused to light in certain corridors. And once every few years, a flicker of green light would ripple through the pipes before vanishing as though it had never been. Hogwarts was trying to remember what wizards wished to forget. But memory is a dangerous thing. It does not stay buried forever. When it stirs, it does so with hunger. And so, while the wizarding world above bathed in its illusion of peace, the one below, older, wiser, and infinitely patient, began to wake. The air beneath the dungeons grew thick with ancient breath. A pulse, faint but growing, thudded through the rock. Students felt chills when walking past the old sinks, though none knew why. Even the ghosts began to drift toward the lower levels, drawn by whispers they could not translate. They would later call it the first stirring. But history, in its arrogance, did not notice, for the keepers of records were busy polishing their truths, while the truth itself was sharpening its teeth in the dark. There are moments when the world shifts, not with thunder or fire, but with a breath. a slow, deliberate inhale that moves through stone and soil, through blood and memory. That was how the first awakening began, not with noise, but with remembrance. The earth beneath Hogwarts stirred, and for the first time in centuries, the castle felt alive in a way it had forgotten it could. The stones groaned like something ancient flexing its limbs. The enchanted ceilings flickered, unable to mimic the sky for a heartbeat too long. Candles bent their flames toward the floor as though bowing to something older than magic itself. And in the dungeons where the walls sweated with age and the air tasted of iron, a whisper slithered up from the deep, a sound that was not sound at all, but a thought older than language. I remember. Few heard it and fewer still understood, but those who did were changed. The first to sense it was a boy from a long line of Slytherins, a quiet, sharp-eyed student named Eldrick Vane. He was not remarkable save for his curiosity, and it was that very curiosity that led him into the catacombs one sleepless night. He followed a trail of condensation along the dungeon wall until he reached the old sink no one used anymore, the one that hissed faintly when the pipes froze in winter. It was there he heard it, a pulse like a heartbeat trapped in the walls. He pressed his ear against the stone. The whisper coiled through his skull, a rush of sibilant words that should have meant nothing, yet he understood. Not because he spoke the tongue, but because something inside him recognized it. When he returned to his dormitory, his eyes were not the same. Over the next weeks, the castle grew restless. Windows shivered without wind. The great lake churned under a full moon, though the air was calm. The ghosts whispered of dreams they had never known they could have. The fat friar reported hearing footsteps, moving below the lowest cellars. The bloody baron refused to pass through the lower dungeon corridor at all. And in the Ravenclaw Tower, a scholar woke screaming after a dream in which she saw a serpent's eye reflected in the stars above. The professors, wise as they were, dismissed it as imagination. Magic misbehaving was not new to Hogwarts, but this was no mischief. It was memory pulling itself together, piece by piece, pulse by pulse. Eldrick began changing. He spoke less, smiled never, and often vanished for hours. When asked where he went, he simply said, "I'm listening." Some nights he woke his roommates by speaking in tongues no one recognized. And though no one dared confront him, rumors began to spread that the castle itself had chosen him as its vessel. Then came the night of the Green Storm. A tempest rolled across the Scottish Highlands, fierce and unending. Lightning crawled across the Black Lake like veins of molten glass. Inside, students huddled under their covers as thunder cracked through the enchanted ceiling. But in the dungeons, Eldrick Vane walked barefoot, eyes glowing faintly in the candlelight. The serpent's song, faint, rhythmic, intoxicating, led him downward. He pressed his palm to the old sink and whispered one word, the only one he understood from his dreams. The sink shuddered. The pipes beneath twisted like awakened veins, and the stone floor trembled with a deep, resonant moan. The chamber opened for the first time in centuries. What happened next was never recorded, though fragments remain in half-burned journals and erased ministry reports. Some say Eldrick vanished that night, consumed by the serpent whose name no one dared speak. Others whisper he became its first priest, the keeper of an oath that would resurface generations later in a boy named Tom. But one truth endures. From that night onward, Hogwarts was never truly still again. Even the portraits sensed it, the way the castle breathed in uneven rhythm, the way the shadows under the staircases lengthened on their own. And though the professors sealed the entrance once more, the serpent's dream had already escaped. It slipped into the bloodlines of those who lingered too long near the dungeons. It whispered in lullabies to children born under stormlight. It hid in the heartbeats of the ambitious, the forgotten, the misunderstood. The chamber had not merely reopened, it had remembered why it existed. There is a truth that moves like a river beneath all wizarding history, unseen, unending, and patient beyond measure. It winds through bloodlines, through memory, through the very stones of Hogwarts itself. And though the names upon the surface change, Slytherin, Vane, Gaunt, Riddle, the current remains the same. The magic that began in devotion ended in obsession, and the dream that began as protection became prophecy. After Eldrick Vane vanished, the castle returned to a strange, uneasy calm. The professors spoke of unfortunate accidents. The ministry scribes sealed their reports, and time, as it always does, began to blur the edges of truth. But Hogwarts remembered. The chamber, once opened, could never truly sleep again. Its pulse grew fainter, but it did not die. It waited. Generations passed. Dynasties rose and fell. The great wizarding wars flared like comets, burning the sky before fading into smoke. And through it all, the bloodline of the serpent coiled onward, diluted, disguised, but never extinguished. They bore many names over the centuries, some whispered, others erased. Gaunt, Riddle, and even those who never knew the ancient power that throbbed quietly in their veins. A legacy not of inheritance, but of remembrance. For the serpent does not pass down gold or land, it passes down memory. By the 20th century, even the idea of a chamber of secrets had become a children's story, a ghost tale for daring students and curious minds. Professors laughed it off, the ministry dismissed it, and the descendants of Slytherin were treated as aristocrats, not prophets. But prophecy has a way of finding the right ears. In a cold orphanage in London, a boy once traced his name in the frost of a windowpane, Tom Marvolo Riddle. He did not know the whispers that guided his hand. He did not know the serpent that stirred whenever he felt alone. But the chamber did. It called to him as it had called to Eldrick and to Salazar before him. The same word carried through time like a promise. Remember. When Tom first walked the halls of Hogwarts, the castle recognized him. Torches flickered as he passed. The air shifted around him as though the ancient walls inhaled in relief. For the blood had returned. The serpent's heir was home. History records what followed. The opening of the chamber, the screams in the night, the student who died, and the monster that vanished again. But what history does not record is what the castle felt in those moments. Fear, recognition, and something that might have been forgiveness. Because Hogwarts was never only a school. It was a living chronicle, a creature of stone and enchantment, watching its children repeat the same mistakes over and over, hoping that one of them might finally learn. Tom did not, but others would. For just as Slytherin's line carried the burden of darkness, there were always those who carried its opposite: courage, compassion, love. The world remembers the serpent because it is dramatic, but beneath that story runs another, of those who faced the darkness and chose not to follow it. Centuries later, when peace finally came and the walls stood quiet again, a faint light glimmered in the depths of the chamber. Not green, but gold. The basilisk had turned to dust long ago, yet its eyes still reflected the torchlight like small dying stars. A soft wind moved through the tunnels, carrying the scent of water and the whisper of an old voice. Even the deepest shadow is proof that light endures. And above, Hogwarts exhaled. Its towers gleamed once more under dawn's first light. The portraits stirred awake, the staircases found their rhythm, and the great hall filled with laughter. Students spoke of bravery, of friendship, of futures yet to be written. And though none of them knew it, they walked each day above an ancient wound, one that had finally, after 1,000 years, begun to heal. The age of serpents had ended, but the story, the truth of magic, of humanity, of balance, would live forever in the stones. Thus ends the history of wizards they never told you. Not a tale of evil or glory, but of remembering that every spell ever cast was once a heartbeat in the dark, and every shadow ever feared was once the dream of someone who only wanted to protect what they loved. History, after all, is not about who won or who fell. It is about who remembered and who chose to forgive.